the idea of asking you to please come over and just share with us a little bit of your work, what you've been doing, but also tell us a little bit more about, those broad questions about what's missing in archive or the lacunas, the how archives can be atypical. And you have been kind of coming back to me saying, Mani, I'm actually quite happy to talk about atypical archives. And I'm sure you will have some excellent examples to share with us. I would like to keep the environment very informal, very relaxed. Sila, tell us a bit more and tell us more about your work and what you do.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you, Monia, because you are giving me the opportunity to speak about something that normally is not a typical topics in academical speech. That atypical archives are looking like something really strange. And we have often the chances to speak about regular archive, institutional archive, organization, and so on. But atypical archive, which is not, an official definition, is an expression I propose to speak about all these archives that are not didn't born with the aim to preserve the cultural heritage, but born with different passions, different needs. And if I can show some slide, I think the conversation could be lighter.
Yes, you should be able to share. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I am. Can you see? Can you see the PowerPoint or not?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Because I didn't see the red window.
If you could put it in present mode, then it will.
Yes, you can see it as well. Okay, great. So basically, I am in. Let me introduce myself, which is not easy because I'm in the middle between an academic life, research, traditional research, and the professional life. And I am a researcher. I work for a university in Rome, but in the same time I work for the main Italian broadcaster, which is RAI. And in the past, I had the chance to work with some directors like Luca Guadagnino, Marco Bellocchio, and so on. And my interest is always the same, even if I am, in the middle between different worlds. And is memories and TV archive and movie archive. And basically, actually, I have the opportunity to work with archive, both in my university and in RAI. And I think that to be in the middle is actually the best, because you have like a double high on different parts of the same word. And the idea today is to bring you with me in this strange word that is the word of atypical archive. And as said, is not an official definition, it's just an expression I propose you to identify strange archive. So what atypical archive are? When I say atypical archive, I mean that in the past, some institutions felt the need to preserve their own heritage, but not to share it with all over the world. So the idea is to preserve it and to keep it inside. And the system they have found to preserve, to catalog it are really different and depend on the archive and depend on who decided to find it, that archive or manage it. And I will show you some example. The first is the private archives. Now we are used to think that we can find private archive online because there are some really important institutions in Italy like Movisa and Cinema d'Impresa di Ivrea that decided to keep private archive, to preserve it, to catalog it. And but in my opinion, we have in front of us a lot of streets to do because there is not yet a proper way to catalog private archive. I mean that if it's difficult to catalog an official movie, to create a proper system to describe a new movies is really, really difficult. And what is strange when we speak about private archive is that we can find it also on a very commercial platform like POM5. POM5 is a platform that born to sell clips that have been produced just with the purposes to be used in movies, commercial, and so on. And in the same time, they have a huge heritage of private archive or movies shooted in the United States between the 50s and the 70s. And the way they use to catalog this particular clip are the same they use to catalog the drone on Rome, for example, is exactly the same. And you can grab this clip for very little money and use it in your movie without asking for any additional authorization. It's true that the contract you did not sign, but you can find on POM5 doesn't give you any kind of indemnification. But remain the fact that you can grab this clip and use it, and we have no idea about the family, the period, the territories, the years, the event, and so on. So, in my opinion, private archives remain one of the a typical archive that don't find yet a proper structure. You still need someone to involved in the production to explain you something about this particular movie. Another example is the archive I am more familiar with are the military archives. I've been working in military archives since 15 years and because my PhD is about a particular section inside the Italian military army, which was involved in the military training. And so they produced a lot of movies in order to train soldiers to make war. To be honest, since the foundation, military archive, the Italian General Army decided to produce movie. At the beginning for scientific reason. So they produce movie for example, for analyze the trajectory of weapons or the effect of a bomb on the territories, or to keep a memory of a particular moment which is important, and they decided to show it to the soldier and so on. But even if we know that these movies exist, we have no idea about where they were preserved. Because it's always the same when we speak about a typical archive. The idea to preserve is something really linked on what you need and what you don't need in that moment. You have not the idea to preserve it for the next generation, to give an access to the cultural heritage. It's just a preservation really linked to the need of this particular institution. And the case I've decided to show you is really particular case because is a training film produced by the Italian Army that have been found in the United States in NARA Archive in Washington. Because this movie, at the end of World War II in Italy, the American Army decided that Italian cultural heritage was like a spoils of war. So they decided to grab some film, keep some film, and bring it into the United States. And the middle of the 90s, there was an agreement between the Italian government and the USA government, and they decided they were obliged to return all these movies to the Italian general, so to the Italian government. But I can show you it briefly. Sorry. Can you see it as well? Can you see the movie?
Yes,
Yes.
you can.
Okay, great. So we can find it now at Istituto Luce, even if, as you can see from the logos, has not been produced by them. And it's not a propaganda movie, it's a training movie that has no interest for normal civil public. It's really boring, so I don't want to make you boring. But the point is that when the American government decided to return all this movie to the Italian government, there was not a proper archive to return the movie. So they thought it could be probably produced by Luce. And this is one of the problems of an atypical archive. Because even if after World War II, the Italian General Army decided to share some of its heritage to the Civil War, and now you can go to the Italian General Army archive and you can see a part of their documents and so on, the one who were not classified, of course. There is not a proper catalog, there is not an official institution that is ready to make a recollection of their own heritage around the world. So for this reason, to be an atypical archive is really dangerous when, and the point is that you can lost a part of your heritage. One of the last example I would like to show you are the Auxilium archives. I've been working for some years in an Auxilium archives because of a movie I did, and these kind of archives are really particular because even if when you make a private movie, you don't think to share it with the huge public, even if the military archive were thinking for an internal use, Auxilium archive had to remain secret in a way, because nobody had to know what really happened into the Auxilium. So it's after Basaglia Revolution that in Italy we start to think about MED and Auxilio as something we have not to shame. But in the history, these archives that are not just photo, but are documents, are letters, are private information about the people that were in the Auxilium and so on, had to to remain secret, because there was an idea of violence and shame linked to the Ausilium and to the people that lived there. And despite of that, private archive, military archive, Ausilium archive are really important to make a reconstruction of our history. And I think it's the same, I can say all over the world, but for sure in Europe. All these archives are part of our history, our identity, and we cannot make a proper reconstruction without their help. So for this reason, at a certain point, they decided to open their doors to create catalog sometimes, but in the majority of cases, you need the help of someone who is deeply dealing to the construction organization, or at least that worked in this archive. My last example, that is the lighter one, and I will also show you some case of studies. So now the conversation, I hope, will be lighter and easier, is are the TV archives. In my opinion, also TV archives are typical archive, or well, they born as a typical archive, because at the beginning, the preservation was not previewed in any case. So when they preserved something, it was by chance. Why? All the archive all over the world decided to starting from this, became that, and then make also a huge digitalized operation. Because, and why, sorry, they decided also to create a website and in which you can have an access to all, not to all, because as you perfectly know, all is not a term we can use when we speak about archive, but with the majority of their heritage. Why? Because of footage. Footage is the practice to use something that have been produced for another program, documentaries, movies, and you decided to use it again, but in a new product. The point is that at a certain point, the schedule of the program and also the hour they have to fill with the schedule became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So they realized they can use what they already have produced, and that people love to see their past. So they also started to create a small program with lots of part taken from other production, other TV production. And at a certain point, some directors decided that to fill the gap between their private memories and our collective memories. They need some footage that some movies, that program that were a part of the memories of all of us, and TV is the major collector of collective memories. So they decided to use it also in movies, I mean fiction movies, and not just in the documentaries. That's this is the general definition of what footage is. But there is not just a simple way to use footage. I mean, there is not a simple way to use footage to speak about something and to show what I'm speaking about. But as footage was an opportunity for all the TV stations to create their own archive and to open this archive to external production and to make profit and money with the sale of this archive. We now, in this specific moment, is one of the core business of some important broadcaster and also companies that born just with the idea to the intent to sell footage like Getty Images. But I have in my career create a sort of a personal catalog of what footage is. And we will see some example, but first of all, footage is a special effect, in my opinion. Then is a mirror maze, and then finally is a puzzle. Let's see some example. For example, when I say that footage is a VFX, a special effect, I mean that footage has the power to keep people alive even if they are dead. And this confirmed the theory of Mame that Bazin did in Qu'est-ce que c'est le cinéma, in which he said that basically cinema born with the idea to keep the man alive forever. And I would like to show you a small the trailer of a documentary I was dealing with. I'm speaking about movies I know very well and I work in just because I have a precise idea of what was the approach with the archive and the footage. Is not to make a self-spot. This is the story of a young guy who died when he was really young during a race. And the idea of the director, Alice Filippi, the director, is to keep him alive. He doesn't die during the movie. The movie is about a specific year of his career. And the only way we had to allow Marco Simoncelli is his name, to allow Marco to speak again with his friend, parents, and all the people we interview for the movie is using the footage. And when I make the research, the idea was exactly to find footage in which Marco can directly speak about with all his friends and parents and so on. And I think that at the end of the day, we achieve a good result. Another example is a movie made by Marco Bellocchio in 2019 about Marco Buscetta. Marco Buscetta was a mafioso who decided to collaborate with the justice at the end of the 80s. And raised to his collaboration in Italy, there was in 1986 a huge process against mafia. And I would like you to show, sorry.
Sono presente, prima quando c'ero contrabbando di sigarette, funzionava tutto a posto. Poi dopo
of course, you cannot understand because he's in Italy and then he's also in Sicilian, so it's really hard to understand also to me, and as you can see there are the subtitles, but Bellocchio decided to watch hours and hours and hours of the tape I preserved about this process, And the reconstruction he did both for the dialogue and then from the light and the flavor of the movie, of the entire movie, is exactly what he could see in the footage. But there is something that he did, I think is particularly interesting, is that during this process, the mafiosi that decided to collaborate were preserved and protected by the Italian justice, so you could not see their faces. As you will see in a while, we can hear Salvatore Contorno, which is the mafioso who is speaking, and but we cannot see him because he had to be protected from attempt, assassination, and so on. And Bellocchio, even if he decided to maintain exactly the same flavor, because the light of the place in which the trial have been set were really particular. You can see there is a lot of green and so on. Even the footage is not good, but he decided to show the face of Contorno, and in this way the cinema will complete something that is missing this time in the television footage. And another example I think is really interesting is the two-pop. When I say that footage is a mirror maze, I mean that sometimes movies that contain footage became themselves a sort of archive. When we make research, we first of all, exactly as we make a normal research, we see all the movies, documentaries that were about this particular topic, and we decided to follow all the traces left by the archive producer who have been working in this process, in this project, decided to left. I mean, names, details, and then title, and so on. But sometimes it's really hard to understand where the footage start and the fictional movies. I mean the border between the fictional movies and the movie and the footage. In this case, is really difficult because on top the reconstruction have been made using the same point of view of the broadcaster footage. So there is totally identification between fictional movies and real life. And I think is really, really interesting, even if there is some dangers in making this kind of product, because it happened that sometimes we decided to use, not me, but we noticed that someone decided to use some part of movie convinced that it was footage and really it was not. So I think that if we are obliged as a researcher or archive producer to leave some traces of our work because this kind of error could be really a mess. And now the last category is that I suppose is closer to your research area. When I say that footage is a puzzle, I mean that is a way to make a reconstruction of a collective memory, which is could not be preserved in a unique archive. As you know, archives lot of lacunas and something is missing, something is not there because they decided not to preserve or not to produce it. And in this case, just a moment, because we cannot see. In this case, Marco Bellocchio decided to make a movie about his lost twin. Marco had a twin who decided to commit suicide at a certain point of his life, in the moment in which Bellocchio was really involved in his career. And he felt guilty about this loss. And at a certain point, he decided to speak about all his brothers. They are a huge family. And also all the people that knew his brother, and to collect all the memories. And in this movie, we can see how the memory can be different from each people. They all speak about the same event, and they didn't tell the same story at all. So in this case, Marco used footage like a glue to make a link between all the stories that were about the same event and the same person. And footage is like, is called to bring an official truth, even if it's not possible to have an official truth. But in this movie, Bellocchio asked the footage to bring an official truth about that period and that moment and that event. And in this movie, we can see how it's possible to make mix between home movies and official archive. And the last example I would like to share with you, no, it's not the last list, is this series produced by Amazon, in which I have been working for. I'm speaking about for the reason I already said, and this is about a very strange case that happened in Italy in 90, about a small city in which all the children at a certain point were kept away by their family, because even if those children didn't know each other, they told all the same story. It's a story about violence, about Satana, and about it is a terrible story. And basically, most of the family are not guilty, but they didn't see their children anymore. In this series, they decided to interview all the parents, all the children that accepted to be interviewed, all the judge, the lawyers, all the people involved, and in order to create an official story that is composed but singular memories that were not complete, because, for example, the family did not see their children anymore, the children did not see the family, they don't know the stories, and so on. So all the people involved knew just a small part of the stories. And the footage is really important, because we had the children audition at the court, not actually at the court, in a private place, because they were sensitive subject, but we have the children's story at the time. We have official archive, like television archive. We have private archive from the families, and we have also the interview done to the children now and to the parents now. So in my opinion, this is a complete puzzle. Now here we have all the pieces we need to see the story. There is not judgment because at the end we don't know exactly how the situation was, but we have a complete panorama about the situation. And without the footage, it could be not possible at all. Really last example is another film about Tommaso Buscetta, which has been done by Italian-Russian director, Mark Franchetti, and who share private archive, official archive, because Franchetti had the chance to obtain the collaboration of the last of the Buscetta's wife, who decided to share with him all his archive, private photos, and so on. So we can see a man that usually we are used to see from just one point of view, that was the point of view of the Italian television, from some different points. And is really important because this movie is about the difference between the official person and the private person, the evil man and the good man, the good father, because Buscetta was very linked to his family and his wife and his sons. And we can see how different atypical archive, perfectly mixed together in order to create a complete reconstruction of a story. And I think that this kind of product could be also a chance to make recollection of something that otherwise could be lost. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Silla, for that. We have been writing like mad, sat here, because we absolutely loved everything that you were saying. We'd like to open the floor, please, to questions from anybody. You can either raise your hand, please feel free to turn your videos on if you're comfortable, or if you wanted to chat in the chat box there, that's absolutely fine. We do already have a question for you from Sidlingappa, who has asked, we would like to build an internal film archive for online streaming. Would you suggest a suitable open source application or platform for that? Okay, you are asking how to share it or how to make the movie. Sidlingappa, if you're available to speak on mic, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, we wanted to only for streaming for already available documentaries and films.
Okay, I suppose that Vimeo is the platform you can use because you have the chance to protect your movie with a password or not, if you don't want to allow the download or not allow it. But and at the same time, it's a good platform. It's not like some private platform like Box, for example. It's a good platform to share it because if you allow this function, people can go to Vimeo and search and find your movie, and it's totally free. So
yeah. Thank you, Silla. Can you put those platforms on here in the chat?
Yes, of course. I will give you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wait to see if we've got any more questions from our audience, if anybody has anything that they would like to ask. Again, just to reiterate what Monia said, this is an informal space. We don't want this to come across as conferencey, although Teams does not help that space. That's
fab. Yeah,
thank you for that.
Or if you need to build an archive, you can also use this platform that allow you to share content, and to make an elementary structure. which is box.
That's fantastic. What we will do is at the end of the session today, we will download the links, collate the links that you've put in, and then we will circulate to everybody who's on the list for today. That's fantastic. Okay, firstly, Scilla, thank you so much. There was so much in what you'd said, and it's fantastic seeing that footage, the videos, the examples really brought things to life. Archives as political spaces was something I'm very interested in how politicized archives become. In terms of the absences and politicization, I mean, where do we go now? How can we create a more, I hate to use the term, democratized approach to archiving? Where do we see the future of that?
Well, I think that the secret is in sharing information. I mean, there is an emblematic case in AHRC, for example, which is absolutely missing about the student movement in 1968, for example, because the government decided not to show some part of this story, which is a story of violence, story of students against police, and so on. And there is an archive here in Italy who decided to recollect all these private movies because they have not other sources, which is AMOD archive. And so the point is that, in my opinion, experiment like EFG for the World War I could be a huge chance to share the heritage and create exchanges between archives. I mean that we cannot make EFG because it was a huge effort all around the world, but having some places in which, if you want, like an archive, you can share your heritage, your movies related to some topics, some specific topics, links to the history of that country or a part of history which involved more countries, it should be great because now if one of the most important skill a researcher must have is to know the most archive we can. So sometimes we use our time to find archives in the web to understand what is the collection and so on. So in terms of democracy, I think that sharing is the secret, is the solution.
Scilla, I just have just a comment and then a final question for you, and then this is going on at some point because I will have so many other questions. I literally took so many notes, but a couple of things that really grabbed my attention was when you were trying to, in a way, to propose the definition of what atypical archives are. To me, something that in a way, when you're going, for instance, you were going through the private archives, but even the military archives, in fact, something that came, that popped up in my mind was that there are absences, absolutely. And I think this is one of the key theme that we will be covering today. But those absences are a lot more loud than what is actually there. That was one thought kind of that popped up in my mind. As an historian, I also find that those archives are incredibly interesting and have a history of sanitizing history. So making it, how to put it?
Sanitized.
Well, sanitized.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is interesting and disturbing at the same time.
Yeah.
The third point I had was, at the same time, there are some of the archives you've been talking about that can instead enable. So they become enabler of new stories, of reconstructions, of removing the mask of Buscetta. So through you, I relived the part of the, the history of Italy, of Italian society that I left behind because of where I am at the moment. It's a long time. And it's very interesting how they become in a way spaces that, how to say, to compensate those missing, those missing histories, but at the same time they become creative as well, creative tools as well, which is again something else that a typical archives can potentially, as I say, enable. My question goes to actually to you as an academic and as a practitioner, just because I find myself in the same position as an academic, and as you see with what we have here. As academics, we are often we are asked to look at and to work in specific way, and then as practitioners, especially if belonging to specific institution, we need to operate according to what the institutions offers. Let's put it like that. What kind of discrepancy do you find, and how do you
Balance.
yes,
Yeah.
how do you balance those two? I know, but sharing some joy and
well, first of all, I would like to say something about the link between the military archive and the private archive and the auxilium archive, because basically there are lots of points that link all this archive. First of all the production have been made internally for the people who live there. So is exactly the same. I think that training movies is exactly the same of home movies. Is extreme, and but if you think just a little, you can realize that a training movies is done for soldiers that were part of a family, and this movie can be interesting just for this soldier. Is like the summer movie that no one wants to see if they are not directly involved, if they not feel represent in this movie. And it's the same from the auxilium archive, because they have to keep a secret as well as the military archives. So I suppose at this point, but it's not a complete thought, that all the atypical archive has some common point that not allow them to become a traditional archive like the TV one. And so I think that this kind of archive can be studied, can be used, but cannot be bring to the status of official archive. Never. And about the balance, I think that is a source, because you can have always the vision between different points, and you can also bring some of your experience in the different words, even if I'm tired, because you need lots of energy, because you need lots of energy, and but basically is a way to be free, not to be linked to something really strictly, so I feel tired but free at the same time.
I guess we share some of the feelings.
Tired but fulfilled.
Yes.
Tired but fulfilled. I think it's a labor of love.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do
Exactly.
as academics, I think a lot of the time. We are going to have to move across to our next speaker, but Sila, we will be hounding you with emails.
Of course.
Thank you so much. That was
thank
wonderful.
You so much.
I'm going to let Monia introduce our next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Sila. Thank you so much. So I'm actually quite excited, because today is all about friends that I've never met in person, but we are meeting for online. So I'm going to shift to the next section of this Sandpit, and I'm very pleased to introduce Sumant Batra. Sumant, I met Sumant again online perhaps a year ago or so, full COVID time, and we were happily talking about archives. And we were happily talking about what we were trying to do here with this archive, and of course, what Sumant has been really campaigning for and supporting, which is the Cinemazi project. Sumant, I'd love to, if you could introduce yourself to everyone, and I know you got a presentation. Let me know if you would like to play it, or I can play it for you, whatever works for you. You need to unmute.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, well, thank you so much for the introduction, Monica. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all, and to be able to share what we are doing and to learn from what others have been doing. I am here in UK, and therefore also same time zone as you are. I'm here for another conference, which I finished yesterday. So Monica, why don't you just put the presentation on, please, if you don't mind? I'm just using 4 or 5 slides, so it should be okay. If I can just request you to do this. That's all right. So I just will take next 2 minutes to let you know about myself. I'm a lawyer by profession, an insolvency lawyer actually, and my bread and butter lies there. But I and my wife have had deep interest in documenting history, and that is why we have interest in a variety of things, including Indian cinema, where we believe there is tremendous work that is required to be done in order to capture the rich heritage and the history. And cinema is one such thing, but as I will speak, I will also share with you some of the other stuff that we're doing and how we are now in the process where we're trying to, in a way, consolidate and create a coherence after having done some groundwork on this. Well, thank you so much, Monica. I mean, this is helpful. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Indian Cinema Heritage Foundation. This is something which was set up in 2018. I and my wife have been collecting Indian cinema memorabilia now for almost 12 to 15 years. And we've reached a stage, in fact, we reached a stage almost about 4 years ago. We were starting to wonder, what should we do, or what should we be doing with such vast resource that we exist? And I have to tell you that, we are the largest collectors of Indian cinema memorabilia in the world, is what I would like to believe. I mean, it's something which started as a hobby, became a passion. And at some point in time, we realized that this has become too big for us to be able to manage and leave it just out there without it being institutionalized. And that is how the foundation came in, which is a public foundation, which we set up in 2018, as I said. And we then donated our entire collection to the foundation. And not just this collection, but a variety of other collections. We are, if I may say, and there's a common thread in some way which weaves all of our collection, which I'll speak about a bit later. But we're also the largest collectors of vintage typewriters in Asia. We have nearly 500 vintage typewriters in our collection. We are also one of the largest collectors of vintage radios in India. And we also have a huge collection of vintage calendar art. Now, and also, of course, a library which has about 32,000 books, including, of course, on cinema. All this now sits with the foundation. Now, the foundation was, if you could just go back one slide, please, Monica. I mean, I just want to tell you, yes. So one of the reasons why we thought that we should put it in a foundation, besides what I have just mentioned, is that what we wanted to do was something meaningful about it. And while we were deliberating this with experts, with friends, while we are great fans of Indian cinema, but I wouldn't really call myself as a film scholar in that sense. But having said that, we do have deep understanding of the landscape of Indian cinema. But what we really wanted to do was to put our collection to some meaningful and optimum utilization. And we realized that one of the things that is missing in our country is, back in India, is that the industry itself has not really undertaken any meaningful effort to document the rich history and heritage of Indian cinema. Nor have they actually even created multiple archives. And the only archive that exists is in Pune, which is owned by the Government of India, National Film Archive, which is, of course, a phenomenal resource on Indian cinema, but it is not available online. So it is not really very accessible. Given the size of our country, it does become a constraint for the scholars and researchers to be able to access, because you have to go to Pune, make a request to allow access to the material that you want to research, which of course they provide, but you have to see there and they let you have copies. But it's not affordable and accessible for everyone. And we also realized that even the National Film Archive, while it has a huge resource as its disposal, but it is not really doing anything to interpret that. They are not really digging deep into that information to be able to bring out various relevances of that context, socially, culturally, economically. And we thought that maybe if we set up a platform, it could fill that gap to an extent. Not entirely, of course, because we are a huge country. Cinema is so huge, 110 years and multiple languages. But we thought at least we could do our little bit. That's how the foundation was set up. Now, before I get into what the foundation is actually doing, I just wanted to give you a glimpse of the scale of our collection. And if we could just move to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. This is a bit dated, though, for about, I think, 3 years ago, because it was a pictorial thing which my colleague put in. We haven't really updated as yet for a presentation. But if you see, what we have in our collection is almost the entire length and breadth of the cinema memorabilia, which you could imagine. Starting from the records, which is the music and dialogue records, but which may not be just LPs as is mentioned on the slide, which is about 12,000, but we have over 8,000 of them, which are 78 records, 0.78, 78 amperes that we call the 78 records that they were called. And then we have booklets, film booklets, which are called as song booklets as well, which I'm sure many of you would be familiar with. Used to contain it was a publicity material. It used to contain a small synopsis, as you would see some of them behind you, I can say, sure, which would have a small synopsis of the film, the credits, the cast, and all the songs in 2 languages, sometimes in 3 languages, Hindi, English, and Urdu. We have them for over 6,000 films, and some of them actually go back to 1913, more in the form of a pamphlet rather than the form of a booklet. Then you have film posters. We have for 5,000 films. And these are across different languages, cinema. Not just Hindi. And we have over 1,000 film magazines, which go back to 1920s, 30s in different languages. Lobby cards, I'm sure you're familiar with that, for over 700 films. Show cards for over 600 films. Screenplays and film scripts for over 450 films. And then, of course, a variety of other assets like film projectors, film screens, the curtains, as they called it, and also, the editing machines, to film slides, to the film rolls themselves, to film tickets, to signboards of house full, to rubber stamps, to anything. This is the whole length and breadth of Indian cinema that we have. Now, if we could, so now this vast resource does not just have aesthetic and visual value. It has a tremendous amount of content underlying it, which could be put to so much use in research. And that is why, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. We decided to set up a research and resource center, which could actually, as a first thing, start chronicling the history of Indian cinema in a multiple ways. And also, in that process, document the contribution of various people in a way where it is not really even known, because what we have in Indian cinema is the star system that developed very early, and therefore the maximum visibility was always given to the stars, the actors, the lead actors, to the musicians, because the songs were very popular in Indian cinema, and also to the singers themselves. Other than that, people who contributed to making Indian cinema what it is today, and laid the foundation for that, in fact, for that matter, were never really recognized in that sense, and very little is known about them to even the film scholars or historians. There's nothing available in the public domain for that matter. So we decided that we should actually capture the legacies of these people. And of course, it's also about the visual exhibitions, and more importantly, crowdsource information, because not everything was documented in writing, and we thought that we would need to actually start a project around oral, documenting the oral history. Go to the relatives of these people, sons, children, grandsons, friends, fans, and ask them about sharing their knowledge and information, and sometimes even the assets that they hold, even though they may not be a physical handing over or giving to us, but sometimes allow us to scan them or take pictures or allow them to be videographed in that sense. So for the first nearly 3 years, 2 years, we started cataloging. I mean, the first task that we did was to catalog and in a way organize our entire conference, our entire collection. For that took us about 2 years. It's still a process which is ongoing because we're digitizing our entire collection, but at the same point in time, trying to catalog every single asset that we have, and we have made a phenomenal progress since then. And then in 2020 January, we formally launched the research center, brought it out in the public domain. We had worked in anonymity for first 2 years, just trying to at least do the basic groundwork for this. Now, if we move to the next slide, I'll show to you that this is the progress that we have already made. So the first major project that the research center has been doing is to create the first digital, freely accessible and reliable encyclopedia of Indian cinema in all languages. So cinema from all languages. We do have some work in this area done by some people, Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, and some other languages, even Punjabi for that matter. But it is all fragmented, it's all scattered, and it's all in writing. But what we decided to do was to undertake this as a complete digital comprehensive exercise with a metadata created where there are hyperlinks, and which therefore you can access with ease by a press of one button. And we have already documented nearly 4,000 people's career. Now, these are, if I may say, these are We created a page on each of the individual, and then we are populating it as we go along, as we find information about such people, the films they have acted in, where they were born, what was their original name, what was their name on screen, who were they married to, who were their children, how many, and if they made any film, did they produce any films, what roles they had, and all this is completely digitized. Similarly, 9,500 films, out of which 2,300 are regional films. We have nearly 531 features. Now, these 531 features are where we have digitized content from magazines, which are very old, not available in the public domain. We have been putting them in a very organized structure at the back end and gradually putting them up in the front and again linking it with the people and the films. What you see as 2,300 on this day is actually 2003. This on this day is actually a data which is basically chronicled on date wise. So 1st January 2022, you will come to know which films were released on this day, who was born on this day, which actor died on this day, any other important event that took place. So it's a calendar, actually a calendar. But of course, this is also a work in progress because we have yet to cover a lot of ground on this. Now, I'll talk about Cinemazi TV in a moment, but I also want to tell you about Cinemazi Memory Project, where we have 13 interviews of people who otherwise would not have the opportunity to share the history and contribution of the people from their family in Indian cinema. And these are people who could be even fans or otherwise. Now, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. Now, very quickly, I want to tell you about two more projects. As I very briefly talked about Cinema Memory Project, this is a very aspirational project because this is something where we talk to anybody, for someone who actually, whose father used to paint posters, to anybody, his father who used to be a club boy, father or grandfather used to serve tea in the cinema or maintain a cycle stand in a cinema, to someone who used to actually paste posters at night on the streets. These are people who have a lot to tell about their experiences on the cinema, and that's what we've been trying. And you can find a lot of their recorded video or audio or even essays on the Cinema Memory Project side. And then, of course, Cinemazi TV is more about dissemination, because this is the research that we undertake brings out such rich content, but we don't really want to overwhelm people by just giving them textual information. What we do is we also run a TV show, which is a Cinemazi TV, where there is a huge amount of playlist of different kinds, short films to longer films, where we try to communicate and disseminate our work based on certain playlists that we have designed. These could be subject oriented. This could be around social subjects, economic subjects, or any kind of subjects. Very, very vast, but of course we are making very good progress. And Cinemazi TV has huge following. Could I just request you to move to the next slide, please, Mani? Now, what we're trying to do is something which will take us at least another 4 to 5 years to reach anywhere close to where we might want to claim that we have covered nearly the entire length and breadth of Indian cinema in terms of documenting the films and the people. At least 4 to 5 years. But I still feel that this is something which will be an ongoing exercise forever, because so many films keep getting made and you need to keep adding them. But what we are also doing on the sides is looking at as to how we can use our collection to create 4 museums around them. And as you see on this screen, these are the 4 museums that we have planned. The curation work has already been done. all the research has been done. That we are at the moment working on the technology for this, and what we are looking for is a right kind of partners who could actually either house our museum, or in some cases we may actually end up doing a virtual as well. Like, for example, the Chitrashala is the calendar art. We might actually end up doing a personal one. We already have one small museum around Chitrashala in India, but we are looking to do one more. And the other three also, the Museum of Typewriters, Radio Mazi, which is Museum of Radios, and the Cinemazi museum is something which we are hoping that in 2023, we will have all the four in place. Last slide, just to tell you that as a foundation, we do a number of other things. We do a literature festival where we talk about cinema. Is called as a Kamal Literary Festival. We have a literary Bhagidari project. We have a number of other projects under the foundation, and what we try to use is use all these platforms to sort of talk about different dimensions of Indian cinema, depending on what we are, talking about, what the platform is. Sometimes it's scholarly, sometimes it's just visual, sometimes it's just entertainment, sometimes even just about food, but everything. Try to do a 360-degree view of Indian cinema as a subject. The only one or two last comments that I want to make, before I hand it over to Monia, is that we, my wife and I, we do this as a sheer passion. We have been putting our money so far into doing all this, but now we having done formidable work, are in the process of stepping out of our shadows and are reaching out for partnerships. We have so there are two partnerships that we have already entered into. One is with the university in India, with the Department of Life Sciences, where we are now currently working on a project to study on the evolution of the villains in Indian cinema, as to how the social situations create the perception of a villain, and how the villains were perceived, and how they have evolved in Indian cinema. And that's the digital humanity project that we have in that university where we're collaborating. And also at this point in time, discussing with the university in UK to discuss how insolvency and bankruptcy was perceived in Indian cinema. And that's a project because it dovetails into a research project that I'm doing on the insolvency as well, on stigma, so stigma and insolvency. And we'll be very happy if we can contribute in any value, in any terms, with any of the projects that you might be doing at your end, where we are able to apply our resources, our information, our knowledge, and the work that we're doing to complement yours, and the other way around as well. And my email address is there on the last slide, so please feel free to reach out. My last comment would be, please do visit our website, cinemazi.com. It was there somewhere in the slide earlier. I forgot to mention at that point in time. But it's easy, cinemazi.com. Google it. It'll come up and you can easily, freely access. But what you see is only a tip of the iceberg, because there's a lot of data at the back end, which we need to constantly upgrade our technology to be able to accommodate such huge data, and also continue to enhance the security around it, so that that data is not just taken away by getting hacked. I mean, there are a lot of people trying to hack. I have to say, every 1 month we have a very serious attempt to hack our data, because it's a very valuable data out there, and a lot of people have been eyeing it. But this is where I'll stop, Monia, hand it over to you. But thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about and share what we are doing.
Thank you so much. I will be, as I'm introducing the next speaker, I will be putting also the link to Cinemazi in the chat, and then we'll come back to you and Yamini for a Q&A. Yeah. So I'm very, very pleased instead to introduce a friend whom I met in person, and we had long chats and walks during my permanence in Hyderabad. So Yamini is a young scholar, very, very talented, and we have been in the past speaking about archives, our interest. I familiarized with her work, and I read her work, and Yamini is we had conversation about what's missing in the large archives or institutional archives, and she really did excellent research to try and in a way inform what is actually missing and tapping into and searching for cinema in state archives. Yamini, if you don't mind coming on camera and sharing your presentation.
I am already on camera. Can you see me?
We can't see you on
Oh,
camera.
I can see Yamini. Yes, yeah.
Interesting. So, let me just give me 1 second, Yamini.
I think we may have two versions of Yamini on Teams. So if you come back up.
This one, maybe.
Yeah.
No, there's only one. I've only logged in once, so I don't
Oh,
know.
well, we can see
Yeah,
you now.
yeah, now we can.
Yes.
No.
Yes? Okay. So are we going to have a question session before I speak? Yes.
We will have a Q&A session at the end with you and Sumant. And Yamini, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Monia, for inviting me. This has been fascinating. And in fact, I've been fortunate to interact with some of the archives. Like, for instance, I'm familiar with Cinemazi, and perhaps because of a Google project which they were working with, and I was actually going through their archives, and it's a fascinating archive. It was great hearing about the project and interesting work they're doing. I'm currently teaching in the Flame University. And my fascination with the archive started with my PhD project, and which I'm trying to take it forward after my PhD as well. So I'm going to share my slides. 1 second. Is it visible? Is it visible?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. Yes. So the title of my presentation today is Searching for Cinema in the State Archives. I'll give you a brief context. So this is where I started my PhD work, saying that there is no history of cinema in Hyderabad, pretty much because all history sort of starts with the coming of the Telugu film industry in Hyderabad. So my curiosity was that basically, if film started at ground zero, how is it that the city can have no history at all? Because if you look at any of the canonical works, they're mostly focused on colonial cities. So we don't really hear about, like, say, Hyderabad, which is not a colonial city, in, say, for instance, the Encyclopedia of Indian Cinema, etc. While it's a wonderful work and it is directional, there is a lot missing as well. So I was my question was, so how come suddenly cinema starts off in the 60s with the coming of the Telugu film industry? And that sort of led me to the archives, and that's where my journey with the archives starts, which sort of continuing and seems like it'll continue for a while now. So this is the context in which I started my quest for searching cinema in Hyderabad. So is there a film history beyond the colonial cities? Because most of the work which we hear about comes from Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, or perhaps Lahore, which are basically colonial cities and hence also the centers of cinema. The reason being that, for instance, in early cinema, one of the most important sources we used is the Indian Cinematograph Committee report, which is again a colonial source. And the underlying, or rather the unspoken thing about Indian Cinematograph Committee report is that the princely states did not participate in it. So it was only limited to the British India. So princely India, which is basically more than 565 princely states, which were major land as well, which had relative levels of autonomy, are not accounted for. So we do not really know if there was cinema, what kind of cinema was there, or is literally this more than half of the, or rather at least relatively half of the South Asian sphere absent of cinema. So that's broadly, those questions arise because most of the work has been done via the colonial sources or studios as well. Again, these studio records are very rare to find, as all of us are aware. I mean, they're very, very rare to find. And even those have been mostly concentrated around the colonial cities. So this is why we don't hear of places like, Hyderabad at all in the early film history map, or generally in the film history map, until the regional cinemas, or the non-national, quote unquote, the non-national, the non-Hindi starts off. Until that becomes prominent, we don't really hear of it. Even if we do hear of the South Indian film industries, we hear of it only in the context of Madras. Again, broadly speaking, all of this has been the story of the industry as to, say, before the capitalist film industry, how does it become that big industry? Like, how does it become Bollywood? Or how does it become this, the studio system, the industrial mode of production, or the flow of money from various, like, say, for instance, the cotton speculation, etc. How does that happen? So it's always been a story of the industry. And again, as I mentioned, it's sort of characterized by very sparse studio records, and even sparser film records per se. There are very few films from the early cinema period remaining at all. So this is what I started with, and it was sort of and this is what I entered the state archives. When I'm saying state archives, each, for instance, specifically talking about my own work, the Princely State Archive of Hyderabad, which is actually a Telangana state archive right now. I entered the archive with this curiosity of, will I be able to find anything on film at all here? And the answer is basically that if you go to the archive and say, look at the catalogs, there is no category of film at all. So film is absent. And none of the, the archivists, nobody has ever heard of anything film in the state archive at all. But in spite of that, I sort of persisted, and I started going through the records. And these records, like most state archives in India, are really, really in very bad condition. That is, they don't have proper catalogs. The catalogs are handwritten with pencil, so it is being erased as we speak. So it is in that condition that I started, still, like, not with much hope, but I started going through the archives. And it was more through a chance discovery that I found traces of film in the state archive. And it is another, it's a totally unexplored area, which we don't really hear about. And this is not the story only of Hyderabad Princely State. It is the story of the more than 565 princely states, at least the majority of them were engaging in cinema in different modes. I'll talk about it in a little more detail in the coming slides, but we don't know anything about it at all. So that's broadly what I'm going to focus on today. And how do we understand cinema, and what does this archive, which is very difficult to be categorized as cinema archive, because it's really a chance discovery, but the chance discoveries are very much possible. What does this kind of archive make us to think about cinema itself as we understand it? So led by this archive, I started looking at cinema more as a social history, instead of, say, trying to say that, hey, these are the early film studios which existed, and this is how they made films, and this is how they operated. Rather, whatever little amount of cinema was there in the princely city, what does it tell me about the princely city? So I was focusing on understanding the society of Hyderabad using cinema. And I think the approach is slightly different, because now, because my questions have been on the city, instead of it being solely categorized as film history, it now it gets categorized as urban history. Because through film, my intervention is that through film, you can talk about the city, talk about the social history, talk about the state, the nature of the princely state, and how was film as a modern, all of these in quotes, modern capitalist industrial technology engaging with the princely state, and what does this interaction tell us about? And these questions are of larger relevance. That is, these questions sort of bring in a dialogue between these various disciplines of, like, history, urban history, and and of course film history. And that's what the state archive lends to film history as a field itself. So instead of examining film as an object in itself, examining the society through film. And what can we say about the princely city of Hyderabad through film? This is what I was looking at in the archive. And as I mentioned, no category of film in the archive at all. So it's mostly what then would you find? So what is it that you should be searching for? It's literally everything and anything. It's more of a chance discovery, and that chance discovery is very, very important because it tells us stories we have not heard before. So, for example, through the form of letters, through brochures, proposals, none of it is filmic in the sense of it's not it's not about what we see on screen. It is about what we see on screen, but the material is more in a written form. There is hardly any cinema as we see on screen available anymore. It's all lost. But there is a lot about it. There's a lot about what kind of films were being envisioned, and both through successes and failures, it tells us about early cinema and its story to what we know today. So letters, both personal and official, brochures, proposals. This is the nature of the archive I'm talking about, and of course, the newspapers and magazines, which is sort of we are familiar with, but also these additional materials which get categorized as perhaps police records, home records, administrative records, but not film. Film is definitely a very important part of it, but they don't get categorized as film at all. And through this, then when I'm talking about film, I'm also talking about how police operated. I'm also talking about how the home office operated, and the administrative, how did the administration look at cinema? So it is about cinema being embedded in the social networks of Hyderabad. Then what does this archive compel us to do is it actually forces us to think beyond the categories. That is, it's very difficult to categorize whether the films which I'm talking about are documentary or propaganda or are fiction films, because they were all of it. So for instance, I'll give you an example. There were films which was like they were European companies or even Indian companies pitching film ideas to the Nizam state, the princely state of Hyderabad. And the princely state was giving some amount of money for production of these films. And these films had content which was a mix of fiction and something which is also about the Hyderabad state. And they were to be shown across the state and outside of the state. They were both being used as propaganda for the state, but they were also supposed to make money. So all of these categories which we think about are merged. So yes, it was about business. Yes, it was also about propaganda. It was also about documenting the state. It was also about diplomacy, because this is a story of a princely state which is trying to present itself to the world via cinema. And these films were very, very popular in the European network because there was a lot of fascination for princely states in Europe. And you can see this in literature, you can see this in magazines, like they were always talking about how were the princes behaving, etc. Film sort of tapped into that curiosity. For example, some of the films which I talk about in my work were screened in, of course, they were screened in London, they were screened in Edinburgh, they were screened in various parts of Europe, and had received wide audiences as well. And further, they were being, it's this thing of being modern. It's about self-fashioning of the state. As I said, they were tools of diplomacy. So through usage of cinema, the Hyderabad state or many other princely states, in fact, were trying to fashion themselves as modern nation states. So they were addressing it's about the self and the world. They were addressing the internal audiences. That is, it was about the ruler and the ruling ideas being addressed through to people, to the subjects which were now being thought about differently, and also to the world, that how is this princely state which is not really under the colonial rule directly, it has relative amounts of, different princely states has relative amounts of freedom. So how is it a modern state comparable to the British colonial establishment? All of this was being achieved through technologies like film. And this story again is not possible to be told through the colonial archive, because we don't hear what was it being used by the princely state for. And So I've spoken about it. And another important aspect, which the Princely State Archive brings to the the broader domain of film history, is the question of patronage. While we always talk about the funding being derived from like cotton speculation or other successful industries into into filmmaking, etc., early cinema was all about patronage. So many princely states were literally, they saw it as an extent in a dual manner. One, as an extension for modern technology, because modern technologies were to be patronized, because via patronizing modern technologies, the state itself would be considered modern. And the second is they were in the habit of patronizing all forms of art. So film sort of fit into both of these boxes. It's a modern technology, but it's also an extension of, arts, broadly arts in the performance tradition, etc. So a lot of, early cinema was about patronage. Again, something we don't really hear about from the colonial archive or the studio archives, because when we're talking about studio as a broad frame, we're already talking about the industry, and patronage, while it might exist, doesn't become the main frame through which we can understand early cinema at all. So patronage is another, frame through which we can understand early cinema. This is something which the Princely State Archive brings to the table. And this is not about film policy. While there's a lot of research on film policy, which we sort of see in the post-colonial, context, it is not about film policy. It is much deeper than that, in the sense that they did not look at it as policy. This quote unquote, the word policy doesn't fit there. They looked at it as something else. They looked at it as self-fashioning, as something. It's not just about having a policy to foster industry. Industry and policy sort of go together. Yes, that was also happening, but it was used for in a much wider domain, for much deeper purposes as well. This again is something the state archives, the Princely State Archives, bring to the fore. And I mean, it's my ongoing project to explore, how while my PhD was focused only on Hyderabad, there are lots of princely states which were engaging with cinema. So it's my ongoing work to look at how a broader understanding of how, and there was exchange of, technology, know-how, all of that happening between these princely states, which again tells us also about, say, broadly colonial history, and not just only about film in the colonial history, but a broader domain of colonial history as well. This is, for example, one of the, random documents which I wanted to show. So this is about something called as Hyderabad Films Limited, incorporated under the Hyderabad Companies Act of 1320 fastly. So you see the usage of a Persianate mode of time, because it is 1320 fastly, it's not 1930 or whatever, but it is also about 1938. Again, there is a dual form of noting of time which is happening, because that's how Princely State of Hyderabad operated. And then you'll also see about, it is addressed to Sir Akbar Haidari, Nawab Haidar, Nawaz Jang Bahadur. So it's also Sir and it's also Nawab Jang Bahadur. So Sir is, as you all know, it's a British title, but Nawaz Jang Bahadur is a local title. So there's a lot of mixing happening here, and it is not simply of it's a hybrid thing. It's not that. There's a lot of power equations which are being determined which we can understand through studying such material. So I'm just going to read it out. Dear Sir Akbar Haidari, many thanks for your letter. I have the Maharaja coming today to see film tests, etc. But if you would give me an appointment on Saturday or Sunday morning, I shall be very pleased to meet you. So we have the patron, which is a Maharaja. I mean, it's not mentioned who that is. I mean, this is from a larger file, who is coming to see film tests. So there was that amount of involvement of the patronage into filmmaking. And this is also in the domain of modern industry, because it is under the Companies Act, etc. So there were several of these intermingling of frames happening in the princely state, which I think sort of enriches our understanding of, say, the early decades of cinema on the whole. Yeah, so that's broadly what I wanted to speak about. And yeah.
There you go.
Thank you
Yamini.
so much, Yamini. That was That was so interesting. It was amazing. From our end, we weren't able to see your.
Oh,
You're now here. We can see you now. That's fantastic. We couldn't see you before. That's brilliant. I think our technology is back working. But that was such an interesting talk, and you raised a multiplicity of issues around state archives, around the identity formation of princely states in the form of, as you sort of talked about, self-fashioning as a form of sort of branding a space in a particular light for outward view, and with the colonial mission to one side, there was also an I wouldn't want to say pre-colonial, but there is a space that exists independent of colonialism. And I think we need to stop benchmarking against colonialism all the time to say, was it pre, was it post? There was an existence that was there, irrespective of that period in time. So I think histories and the boundaries through which you've been speaking about the materials that are there, and you know, the amazing work that you're doing on raising this material and making sure that it actually gets that gets the kind of view that it needs is fantastic. We want to open the floor to questions first for Yamini. We'll start with Yamini because I think Sumantha's had to go off and do a quick keynote, but he will be joining us back after lunch. But does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Yamini at all in the audience? Anything at all from anybody? You can either type your question if you're more comfortable. We've always got questions at the ready, so it's not.
yes.
we don't want to take up the space. I think someone's got them. Yeah, no. No, do you want to kick off, Monia? Do you have a pressing question that you want to ask Yamini?
To me, it's a little bit about now and actually accessibility, Yamini. I think long ago when a couple of years ago now, pre-COVID, when we had our long walks, we had a conversation about the access of this material, and I remember something that is very interesting. And you said, you know, there isn't really a catalog. It's very tough to find material or somehow to work and to operate within an ideal setting. And I remember you telling me stories about, I met this lovely man. He doesn't speak English. He's kind of, you know, local, and so with him there are other codes that I use to somehow access the material you are interested at the time. I would just like to have a sense of, you know, how the administration and what's happening now in that, you know, in that regard. How is access enabled? Was there any change? So how does it operate to legitimize action and to include cinema or the access of cinema that wasn't there before?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So it is actually, access is not enabled, rather it's disabled, in the sense that, you know, like many of the state archives in India, it's the problem of cataloging sort of continues. For example, there are multiple, like tens of books of catalogs which are there in the same format, handwritten, some of them in Urdu, some of them in English. And the problem is, if we think of it, I mean, I've also thought about it, that if we want to make it more accessible, how does one do it? As an individual, so the archive is open to, if you say, for instance, if you want to go as an individual and access, but at an institutional level, it is under the bureaucracy, it is under the state government as such. So I mean, it's very difficult to, like, you know, navigate through the state government, because I mean, they're not responsive. They don't know what they have even to be responsive. So it's that way. So as an individual, I mean, because I've always approached it as an individual, so it has been possible that way. And perhaps it is through that, like, say, for instance, you know, if you go as an individual and somehow, you know, sort of start making digitizing them for your own thing and then probably put it online, they wouldn't care. So that's possible. But at an institutional level, I don't know, it's very, very difficult, because there is an IAS officer and who has, again, they don't know as such what is there, what is not there. There will be multiple levels of permission involved. And so I don't know how the bureaucracy can be worked with. Yeah.
For
I think something that concerns me as well is that a lot of this kind of state archives, they would be, just like you said, in fact, they would be politicized somehow, or they will, you know what I mean, like they would be well, formed by specific political and social context, and that makes the access of material in general a lot more complicated, a lot more normally a lot more selected. So yeah, so that was kind of an observation that maybe we need to.
But perhaps also, like for instance, the Hyderabad State Archives is still very functional in the sense it still functions within the state government. But there are several princely states which are defunct, which were very small, and so those perhaps are still, like, this is something which I haven't explored myself, but my guess is that they must be with the families. Families.
Yeah.
So those can be still accessed, I think, but it requires, of course, it requires a lot of perseverance and all of that. But I think that is very much possible because the family archives can be very much accessed.
Yes.
And they probably will be more interested in, giving it out as well, instead of something like, which is Hyderabad was the biggest princely state. So it still functions very much like under that same geography. So it is probably difficult. But there's several small, like there was one Rampur, which is not a state anymore, which is one small place in a larger state. But the princely family could be there, and that can be one approach which can be used. Yeah.
I think it's a question for you, but actually it's a question for everyone. I mean, terribly fascinated about family archives or private archives, or what Sila was mentioning earlier. But I also am aware about the fact how difficult those can be to access unless you have a relationship of trust that is being built. I think that I would want to ask you, but I open this question to everyone in all fairness. Do you have any experiences about that you would like to share? Strategies on how do we approach, for instance, how do we build those relationships?
Oh, we've had somebody coming in.
Yes.
And please come on in.
Yes,
if you want to turn your video on or your mic on or anything, please do come on in. And I think it's an important question because ultimately a lot of this material is going to be fed by the individuals who have this material. Yeah. Now, fundamentally, we can have institutions that can be heavily, filled with bureaucracy to access this information. But there's two terms that keep coming up time and time again when we discuss anything around accessibility and people visiting these archive spaces, is the question of value and importance. How much value is placed on this material and for whom? And where is the importance laid on this? We've got citizens, diasporic groups and individuals within Britain amongst the Indian community who have reams and reams of, what we would consider archival material, or for them it's collections that they have as families. But the importance, value and significance doesn't go beyond that space because, I mean, is there a bigger conversation that needs to take place before even thinking of archives? Is there a bigger conversation that needs to take place that brings to view the value, importance and significance of the materials that are already there? And that's for everyone. You included, Yamini.
I'll wait for someone to talk and maybe then I can talk about it.
Please, lovely crowd.
Please, wonderful crowd.
Yes, come on board.
We have no incentives to give you right now.
I'm so sorry.
Hello,
Anand. Hi. You need to unmute.
Okay. Yeah. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I'm just kind of jumping into this because I'm not actually an archivist or a historian, but I've been thinking a lot about how we think about archives from the sidelines. And one of the things that I'm actually curious about is this issue of there seems to be a lot of energy at this point of time for preserving digitally a lot of material that is available in some place or the other. But I don't hear enough conversations about interreferencing or curating the material in a way that would actually make it meaningful at this point of time. So what you have is, on the one hand, huge amounts of volumes of material, which can actually be quite daunting when you look at it and say, how am I even going to digitally preserve all of this? And even after preserve all of this, what do I do with it, right? And then at the other end is this question of maybe the way to handle this is to handle this in small amounts, curate it in a particular way, and let even the metadata emerge from the material at hand rather than going looking for material from that metadata, right? So, for example, do you start with saying that this is material that is sponsored by the state or produced by the state in some form? Or is it private material? Or do you actually go pick up the material, take a look at it, and then see what you can make of it, right? And I keep constantly running into unresolved tensions about how to handle this. Some of that unresolved tension has to do with lack of resources, because I feel like there's not been enough money available for people to play around with some of these things. So, and I just wanted to hear if any of you have anything to add to that, because I really love the presentation that Jamini has made, and I think it's a very important conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. Is anyone would like to
Chip in.
come on board? Yeah.
It's a free open space. Please do come on in if you've got even any comments to make. This is not a conference space. We don't want to turn it into a conference space. Please do come on in.
Ishita.
Yeah, I just feel that I should. I don't know if I really know the answer to this. But I mean, I'll speak a little bit more in terms of what we have done in my presentation, but I think I have two parts to this answer, to this question. So one is, how do we access? And I think because I come into archiving from the space of a researcher, I do feel that when it comes to family or personal archives, it might be interesting to help them build their archives rather than get to accessing it.
Yeah.
As a researcher, we do have that advantage, or I mean, so in that sense, we don't need to be experts at it, is what I mean to say. It's also answering what Mr. Anand asked. These are some very basic questions about how do you be resourceful, how do I keep them properly, assuring the family that what they know as a story, no other institution is going to be able to tell about that collection, and hence, how could they be more cost effective in terms of preserving it? And when I say cost effective, it's not to dilute the disciplinarity of archive building, but definitely over the years, we have felt that there might be highest of standards, but there are basic benchmarks with which one could work. There are also creative ways with which one could work. And this is in response to the fact that we have worked a lot in certain kind of communities, areas and regions where it's not just about money and resources, but it's also about not having the necessary skill set or services around you, which doesn't stop them. I mean, it's not where we have gone and done much. We have learned from them to know that it still doesn't stop them to hold on to what is historically important. It's just about helping them build these systems or see the larger picture in terms of how it could be useful, how it could be helpful. And I think then it's simpler when you have co-created these spaces.
Yes.
Access for us, but also access for other researchers comes at an automatic value of trust. It just trickles. I don't want to say trickles down, but it spreads.
Yes.
If they feel that one researcher has been honest enough and done, and again, it doesn't need to be a one-person job. Many of us can come together and put these projects together.
I think you are spot on, like really spot on, Shit. I think that there is something about, I always ask myself, who are the keepers of this culture and so on. And to me, this co-creative element, or to enable the citizen to become keepers as well, as much as in a way we all are, at least in this venue. Yes, it just tick the box.
I think it hits what we're doing quite a lot of, which is that non-extractive. We can't extract things and take and claim ownership. That's something that needs to go. We need to have that co-creative space. And I think on that note, we're going to have to pause for a lunch break, because I'm sure people, at least in this part of the world, are hungry. They may be also in India as well. So what I would suggest is that we will be reconvening just after 12:30 to allow everybody to have a break. And then we will kick off Ishita with you again after lunch, and I'm looking forward to that. So thank you very much for joining us. Please do stay with us. We will keep the teams on here, and we'll resume in half an hour.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you later. Thank you.